Welcome everyone to the Man in Search of Gold podcast. I'm your host, Eric Mangold, and I'm the founder of Argosy Wealth Management. This is the show where we share ideas, strategies, and history to help you improve your life one financial move at a time. Let's get started.
And we're back. Okay, today I am super excited to talk in the Man in Search of Gold podcast with the specialty we're working with physicians. I think it's always great to hear physicians' stories about their relationship with money, how it started and how it progressed and how it's going. And there's a lot of different stories. And I think everybody sharing their stories helps the collective community. And today I'm super excited to have Dr. Adrienne Towsen on with us. She's been an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in shoulder and knees, located in Westchester, PA for the last 21 years. Can I say go Birds?
Yes.
Go Birds for those Eagle fans on here. Went to medical school in Philadelphia, followed by residency in Pittsburgh. Where was medical school? Thomas Jefferson?
Medical school was at the Medical College of Pennsylvania, which has then evolved into, or now presently is Drexel's Medical School. So
Gotcha.
Yeah, it went through a bit of an evolution. Actually, I was the last class to graduate from the Medical College of Pennsylvania, and it merged with Hahnemann while I was there. And then it was MCP Hahnemann for many, many years. And now, and then it became Drexel. I don't know how many years ago, but
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. And then residency in Pittsburgh.
Yep. I was there at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh.
And then returned to Philadelphia for her fellowship and stayed on the eastern side of the state ever since. She has two young adult daughters who were both born during her presidency, and she raised them as a single mom, which no easy task, with the help of her parents. She found I can't wait to talk about this too. She found a passion in competitive ballroom dancing several years ago. How many years ago is several?
7.
7. Okay. So not new, but kind of mid. Okay. Competitive ballroom dancing several years ago, now competes internationally with her instructor. Now, her life changed drastically over the past few months as she resigned from her orthopedic practice, where she was a partner for 19 years due to a private equity acquisition. So this is really, really timely. The impact has been significant financially, emotionally, a massive dramatic impact. So I'm really excited. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So I always start off, where did you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey.
Where?
We moved around a few different places, but I spent like my high school years and much of the time in a place called Flemington, New Jersey, sort of central Jersey. My parents are both from New York City. So when they got married, they moved to Jersey. And then, I grew up there basically until I went to college. I went to college at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. And then I've ended up in Pennsylvania ever since.
Were your parents, were they physicians?
Nope. I'm actually the first doctor in my family, unless you go back to my great grandfather, who I never met. But there is one doctor way back. But no, my dad was in the computer software business for the longest time. And then my mom got to be a stay-at-home mom for a long time, but she worked in a physician's office for a while. But yeah, no real medical background in the family.
What was your progression to medicine? Did it start early on, or was it more like in college? Where did the bug bite you?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, my dad had always wanted to be a physician. He had talked about that some, like growing up, and then, it kind of just didn't end up following that path for him. And so I think that sort of bug was in my ear a little bit. But then really, I think when it happened, when I played sports throughout like my younger years, middle school, high school, I played lacrosse. I injured my knee playing lacrosse, and that happened more in college. But when I went to college, I was already kind of thinking that I wanted to be a doctor. At Haverford College, they didn't have a pre-med major per se. So I was like a microbiology major, but definitely was interested in it. And, I'm not sure if there was just nothing else that interested me more, or it was just something that I thought like I really wanted to do. I thought it would be, obviously a great profession, a great way to have a stable profession and help people. And, it was definitely something that I think also, again, my dad's influence a little bit, it was something I wanted to, pursue. And then in college, injured my knee and needed surgery, playing lacrosse.
Okay.
So I had an ACL reconstruction my sophomore year in college. And then I, through that experience and going through not only the surgery, but then the rehabilitation part of it, I spent some time actually also working as like a student athletic trainer and, saw like at my college and saw like the rehab aspect of it. And then the surgeon who did my ACL procedure really became a mentor for me. And at that point I was sold. I was hooked. That's definitely what I I wanted to do. And then I actually spent 1 year between, took like a gap year, if you want to call it, between college and med school. And during that year, I worked in the physician's office who did my surgery and kind of shadowed him and spent some time in the OR, spent a lot of time in the office, and continued to work in the training room at Haverford College. And just kind of, it was a year for me to kind of solidify I think my desires and make sure that that's exactly what I wanted to do. And yeah, and then, applied med school, and I guess the rest is history sort of. But yeah, I think it was really, and also for the orthopedic part of it, a lot of it was the, kind of sports aspect and going through, the sports injury and surgery and all of that myself too. So
How did that start with the mentor? Like, did you just approach him and say, "Hey, listen, I'm thinking about getting into medicine"?
yeah, well, so I was, again, sort of quote unquote pre-med, in college.
Hmm.
Going through that whole experience when I was a sophomore really kind of geared or led me more into the orthopedic world. And so
Hmm.
then the surgeon that did my procedure, Larry Miller's his name, he was just like just the greatest guy ever. And just, was when I told him that I was interested in it, he's like, well, you should think about orthopedics and, that kind of thing. And then as I started doing the student athletic training, then, again, that's sort of a little bit of an angle you can kind of see. I did help with some of the rehab for some of our athletes on the season when I wasn't playing and went through my own rehab. So then through that, he was the team physician for my college, which, is how he ended up being my surgeon. He had gone to Haverford actually, years ago. And so then I actually had a little bit of a question once I was going through my own rehab, if maybe I wanted to be a physical therapist also. So I had that thought in my mind, that possibly I would go to physical therapy school versus medical school. And so we talked about that. And then, I decided I was going to take that year in part to make that decision as well. And so he was like, well, come to it was kind of like that kind of a casual thing. We'll come to the office, come hang out and really get a sense of what we do. And so I don't remember exactly, but I think I probably went to his office like 2 or 3 days a week, and then went to the OR sporadically. And then I was working as an assistant athletic trainer at Haverford College during that year. So I was like really seeing for sure like both sides of it and what I preferred. And he was just, incredible. And then seeing what he did, what he had done for me, and then seeing, other patients obviously over that time and the time that I got to go to the OR, I think also really kind of just it sealed the deal. Like that's for sure what I wanted to do.
What was your first eh, time in the OR like? Was it overwhelming? Was it exciting? Like a little bit of everything? Like what's that
Yeah,
like?
I think a little bit of everything. Just it's kind of you go in there kind of like deers in the headlight, like kind of not really sure what to expect. I mean, obviously there's lots and lots of medical TV shows and things like that now. Maybe a little bit less back then, but certainly there still were back then. So you get a sense of what it's like. But it's just it's pretty I think overwhelming, but also exciting. I mean, I wasn't one that was like grossed out by it or afraid that I was going to pass out when I went in. Because certainly, I've seen that with people who have even like, come and visited my OR, that's happened a couple times. But
Mm.
yeah, I think I was just like, I was in awe of it. And I was just really thought it was just the coolest thing. And I want to learn how to do this.
I guess that's a good sign, right? Like,
Yeah.
now, if someone, a little tangent, but if someone goes into the OR in the first time and they are grossed out by it,
Mhm.
is that a moniker? Or are you just like, I don't think they have what it takes, or can somebody recover from that?
Yeah, I think you can absolutely recover from that. I mean,
Okay.
I think sometimes no matter what, I mean, you can have a very strong will and a strong stomach and all those things. And I mean, I do a lot of arthroscopic surgery. So sometimes it's
Okay.
nice when, like younger kids, if they're even like a high school age or college age and they're just not sure and they want to shadow, like I would do that for friends' kids or colleagues' kids. They would come in just to maybe see what the OR is like.
Because it's
And,
not as
you know,
invasive of a.
yeah, and so it's
Okay.
not so gross to see. There's not a lot of blood everywhere. So sometimes, even still, sometimes it would be a little bit hard for people at first. But I think that's a nice way to go in and kind of get your feet wet a little bit, and you're not, seeing as much like open surgery where it's a little bit more, maybe a little more shocking the first time you see it.
Hmm.
So I think, but I don't think it's like an absolute, like, if you can't handle it the first time or even the second time, whatever you're there, that, it's not something that you can possibly do. I think it can be a little bit of that shock factor at first and
Yeah.
just kind of seeing everything. And then like I had one girl who she just didn't eat breakfast and she, came in and like she was just kind of a little bit dehydrated or whatever. And like, sorry. And it was, not even like, again, it was an arthroscopic case. So it wasn't anything too awful to look at. I didn't even realize it was happening. And then I realized that she was like being escorted out of the room, and then she felt so, she was embarrassed and whatever, because she was
Sure.
definitely pre-med. I think one or both of her parents were physicians, and so and
Yeah,
then
even
she came
harder.
back like 2 weeks later, had eaten breakfast and whatever, was totally fine. So,
Okay.
I mean, there's different factors that can play in, but even if it's not related to that, I think if the first time or second time you go, you're like unsure or feel like, I don't know if I can handle this, it's not necessarily, I mean, you can't do it.
Hmm.
I think you're either meant for it or you're not, though. I mean, I think, certainly there are certain people who, just even my daughter, my oldest daughter cannot stand for me to talk about what I do. Like, she is the most anti-medical person you ever want to meet. Even if she has like a little paper cut or something, it's like, she doesn't want to deal with seeing blood or anything like that. So heaven forbid I start talking about some, please, or
Knock it off.
like on my camera roll, there might be some pictures from surgery, whatever. She's like, oh, like, why do you have this on
Yep.
there? I'm like,
Yep.
so definitely not for her.
It's so funny because I have a
Mhm.
number of clients that have,
Yeah.
when they go through their camera roll, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, and I see it. I'm like, what is that? And they're like, well, that's a hip.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that
Yeah.
doesn't look like a hip. I
Right.
don't
Right.
know.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So then residency. And then at what point at residency so now residency, you've got a lot going on. So your daughters are born, and also you're working tremendous hours, right? And then what led you to, I mean, I guess it started with orthopedics, but then do you start specializing in shoulders at that point, or are you doing a little bit of
Yeah.
everything?
No, a residency is 5 years, all of orthopedics.
Okay.
So yeah, so I was in Pittsburgh for that time. Yes, and both my daughters were born then. So very hectic time. This was, of course, many years ago. It was before there was any kind of limit on how many hours you could work. I mean, that's the now
Okay.
there's
What
80 hours.
hours, what kind of hours are you putting in?
Yeah, so
Sorry to interrupt.
yeah, no, no, no. I mean, I was in a 2-man or 2 girl or guy, whatever program. I was the first woman in the program, which, in orthopedics, I faced that every step of the way, first and only woman. And, still to this day, I think the percentage of women in orthopedics is only maybe about 7 or 8%. I think it was more like
Yeah.
5 or 6% back when I trained. So yeah, it's still, I mean, it's growing, and I think if you look at maybe people in training, but I think people in practice, I do think, because I have looked it up from time to time, I think the statistic maybe, depending where you read, is like 7 to 8%. Yeah, and so, of course, you figure I trained, I started residency 26, 27 years ago. So, there's definitely been, more women going into the field, but, it's still definitely super male dominated, which is fine. But yeah, so during residency back then, I mean, we were it was just 2 residents a year. So a fairly small program, but a super busy trauma center. And it's since grown. I think these days they have maybe 4 residents a year. There's several fellowships at the hospital as well. Back then, it was basically just the 2 residents a year, and then I think the only fellowship we had back then was a hand surgery fellowship. So I mean, which was great training for us because there weren't a lot of fellows like ahead of us in all the different subspecialties, which was nice. But we worked probably routinely 100 or more hours a week. I mean, and we were, depending on what year, earlier on, you're like on call overnight in the hospital, maybe as much as every 3rd night, and then as you get further along in the program, then you might be more of like a backup call, or not in-house, as we say, like as much. But excellent training. And honestly,
Mm.
even though it was like a tough time and I had my kids then, and my marriage fell apart and many things happened then, I would say that some of the fondest memories I have are during my residency, and the guys I worked with were just incredible. We're all still friends to this day. We have a group chat to this day. Like, there's about 10 or 12 of us. We're all scattered around the country, and any one of them I could call at any time for anything. And they're just kind of like all my big brothers. And so it's a pretty cool bond that you have then.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question that I always have is that when you're working 120 hours a week, and it's not like you're doing, there's a line, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot on the line. How, say you're at your 100th hour of the week and you've probably got 4 or 5 hours of sleep. How do you then stay frosty and get ready to deal with the next patient when you are probably exhausted
Yeah.
mentally and physically? How do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely difficult. I will say, like, back then, and again, it's been a while, so I don't know how the programs are structured as now, but we were pretty much in the OR all the time. I mean, so there wasn't I mean, you might, like, if you got to go to a clinic day or a clinic afternoon, it was kind of like a treat, even though depending back then, like, we might not look at it as a treat. Like, we usually preferred to be in the OR, and you knew that that's where the crux of the training was. Hey, I need to learn how to be a surgeon. I mean, you also need to learn a lot of other things, which we really don't learn as well as we should have, maybe, as
Like
far
what?
as, like office, like being in the office and like actually like going through like, the like just the standard like office visit, how to manage an office, like things like that. I mean, you don't, at least back then, you're not really learning very much at all about kind of like the business aspect of it or anything else. along those lines, which, can then be helpful later on, of course. You're not learning as much about like the patient interactions and, how to like kind of go through and manage like an office day or an office visits. I mean, some, don't get me wrong. I mean, and that's maybe stuff you can quote unquote figure out a little bit more easily. And kind of some of it's just makes sense as you go through the whole process. And we're certainly doing consults on patients in the hospital and stuff too. And the overall framework of evaluating a patient and looking at their imaging and coming up with a diagnosis and a plan is the same, whether it's in the hospital or in the office for the most part. But
So yeah,
yeah.
please.
No. I was just going to say, but so as far as like the days and being long days and being tired, I mean, I think, you kind of just develop a tolerance for it. And then for us, for the most part, we are in the OR assisting. I mean, and we're, and as you get further along, then you're able to do, certain parts of the procedures and, you're being more like the lead surgeon, at least for a little bit, like in your fourth or fifth year. But you always have somebody to fall back on. Like there's never like someone who's going to be more well rested and whatnot than you for the, most likely your attending surgeon, or then maybe, depending on the particular day or case, like you might have a fellow there too, and they're probably not running around as crazy as you are. I mean, they have a busy schedule too, but they may have a little bit different responsibilities. We had a couple physician assistants in our program, not many, but there's definitely a team and there's people that you can kind of fall back on. And I mean, if you've been up all night on call and then you've got a full day of surgery the next day, there's people there to kind of help. I mean, I definitely can remember sometimes, being close to like wanting to fall asleep holding a retractor at a table. Like that legitimately did happen, but you were never really alone. So, there was always opportunity to, like, if someone was really, that there have been times where people say like, go get some sleep, go to the call room for a couple hours or do something, so you never really felt like you were going to be somebody who was like jeopardizing like, a patient's safety or the outcome
Hmm.
of the case just because you were so tired from, working all those hours. And again, I think there's a little bit like we were somewhat like, you're running on your adrenaline, you're a little exhilarated by it. Like, I mean, maybe day after day, some days you were just tired no matter what, but also there was still a lot of excitement, a lot of like, hey, this is cool. Like I'm getting great training. Like I need to learn this. Like, don't send me away. I want to be here, that kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Well, I imagine if you're if it's just two of you in that
Mhm.
program and you're in the
Yeah.
OR all day, there probably isn't very much you didn't see.
Right. No, for sure. We had great training. I mean, we probably had 20 or more attendings, like all of the subspecialties were covered. So, I mean, we would be on rotations as we went through. And then, you got to, learn all the different, subspecialties within orthopedics. And then fellowship year was the year, that I did an orthopedic surgery sports medicine fellowship. So that's the year that I got to then focus on doing shoulder and knee surgery, exclusively.
Okay. And at what point do you say, okay, I've seen everything,
Hmm.
seen a lot,
Yeah.
but then starts leaning towards, I think, okay, I want to focus on shoulders. I want to focus on these. How does that evolve?
For me, there was some, maybe predisposed notion that I wanted to do sports medicine and in that aspect, just because of my history of going through, ACL reconstruction and being an athlete and all of that. So I definitely already went into it with the idea that like sports medicine is probably what I want to do. And then as you go through, I actually really liked trauma, but I had no interest in that lifestyle. So, that was the other thing is
What do
that,
you mean?
so if you're an orthopedic trauma surgeon, then you're going to need to be number one, like in a big hospital setting, or a hospital that has like a at least probably a level one trauma center to be doing the cases that you want to do, or that these high level trauma cases. But it's also more like unpredictable schedule, unpredictable hours, like could
And
be
you
off.
just had your kids.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, as a mom, or even, ultimately a single mom, but even if I wasn't a single mom, as a mom, that didn't really appeal to me too much, although I really enjoyed some of those cases. And, we do fractures and things even in my subspecialty, I do certain fractures as well. So that was just always kind of fun, like putting the puzzle pieces back together and, doing the fractures was fun. And then otherwise, I mean, I enjoyed most aspects, most specialties or subspecialties with orthopedics, but there was nothing really that I enjoyed more than doing the sports medicine cases. I really enjoyed the arthroscopic, techniques. So that's something that I think also is like some people, it kind of really clicks with them that, like some people are really kind of, let's say, meant to scope and other people aren't. So like one of my co-residents who is now like an orthopedic oncologist, does like huge trauma tumor cases, and he does some trauma and other things too. But like he's in Texas. He's like, yeah, I don't know how you do that scope stuff. He's like, I never like that, but he does these like, and I'm like, I don't know how you do what you do, like these big open like trauma cases, or I keep saying trauma tumor cases, and doing these huge complex revision joint replacements and everything. So it's kind of like, again, for me, it was just the, wanting to do these sports cases, wanting to take care of like that population of patients. And then I really enjoyed the arthroscopic procedures and like took to it. Like I was like, okay, I can do this. Like, it's a little bit of like a hand-eye coordination thing. And I wasn't one who ever played a lot of video games, but that's what people often say. Like, if you're good at video games, you'll be good at arthroscopic surgery, because it's that same kind of thing. But
Okay.
I really enjoy it. That's my favorite. And in my practice now, or what I was doing primarily shoulder, and it just evolved into my favorite joint between the shoulder and the knee, like over some time. And then in the shoulder, I did everything though. I did arthroscopic surgery. I did joint replacement, shoulder joint replacement, fractures, the whole gamut. So that was kind of cool too, is that sports medicine usually lends itself into doing joint replacement of the shoulder. And then the guys who do hip and knee pretty much just do hip and knee. So, and that varies, but like in general, that's the way it was in my practice anyway.
Okay. So then residency, then fellowship, and that was in Pittsburgh too?
No, fellowship, I came back to Philadelphia. That's when we moved back to Philadelphia.
Okay.
Or Philadelphia area. And I did my fellowship at Thomas Jefferson in Philly.
Okay. And then that was all shoulders?
Shoulder and knee. So
that was shoulder and knee.
Yeah. So it was a sports medicine fellowship at Jefferson. And so it was a combination of shoulder and knee.
And then how old are the girls at this time?
They were just born. So we moved back here in, my residency was from 1998. 1998. It's crazy to say the 90s, right?
But
yes, 1998 until 2003. And then my fellowship was 03 to 04. So we moved back here. My daughters were just about to turn 1 and 3. So during my fellowship, they have end of the summer birthdays. Fellowship probably started in August. And so my oldest would have turned 3 that August. And then my youngest just turned 1. My youngest was born my last year, like my chief year, finally 5th year of residency. And my older daughter was born at the beginning of my 3rd year of residency. So yeah, so 2 very little ones.
And then fellowship, do the hours decrease from residency? Is it not as intense?
I think it depends a little bit on your program and then also your subspecialty. So for me, with a sports fellowship, the day-to-day hours are still, fairly long. Also, I ended up living about an hour away from where I was working. So there was the commute part of it. So that maybe wasn't ideal, but based on what happened with my like personal life and situation, I ended up moving in with my parents at that point. So that's what happened. But anyway.
And they're in Flemington.
What's that?
They were in Flemington?
No, my parents, actually, I can back up a second. My parents moved to Pittsburgh when I first got pregnant.
Okay.
So yeah, so my mom, my parents are saints. My mom has taken care of my daughters since the day they were born. So I mean, I was married, but my ex-husband was working. So when I got pregnant the first time, my parents moved to Pittsburgh, and then at the end of my residency, when my second daughter was born, so the beginning of my last year of residency is when my marriage started falling apart. So then when we came back for fellowship, my parents were just in Pittsburgh for us, and so then they came back, and at that point, it would have maybe been different if I was not getting divorced, but I was getting divorced at that time. So we ended up all moving in together, and we just moved into a place that was like relatively, in the vicinity of where my fellowship was. We really didn't know what the future was going to hold, so merging our families together and then finding a place that was like affordable and sensible for what we were doing. We ended up still being about an hour outside of the city. I mean, we had no plans to live in the city, but you kind of have to going a little bit farther out of the city to get something that we kind of wanted in an affordable price range. So anyway, that's how that happened. But as part of a sports medicine fellowship, often you're doing coverage of sporting events. So even like my day to day was still a long day, depending on which facility I was going to, because I also worked with 4 different surgeons, and there was different facilities that I would travel to depending on who I was working with. But then you were also, the different surgeons that I worked with all had responsibilities with either professional level sports teams or college level or high school or all of the above. So then as the fellows, we were often needed to be like on the football field, on Friday nights for high school football, or at the Phillies game, on whatever day it was. So there was a lot of extra time, and it would not be unusual to see me stroll onto a football field at one of the local high schools with my double stroller and my 2 children. Or my older daughter, who again was 3 at the time, would come when we would cover the Phillies. One of the docs I worked with was the Phillies team doc, and so we would get 2 tickets to the game, so she would
Nice.
come with me to the games,
Little
and
benefit there.
yeah, I'd have to go to the training room ahead of time and after, but she could come with me, and and the players like were really kind to her, and she got like a ball signed at that time and everything, so it was pretty cool. But
That's
it
good.
was still a pretty time consuming year. There wasn't the overnight call that I used to have during residency, but
Hmm.
it was still long days.
Okay. Okay. So then after fellowship, now what happens?
So there was a little hospital. So again, we lived about an hour outside of Philadelphia, kind of south and west of the city. And there was about maybe, let's say, 30 to 40 minutes from where I ended up working ultimately. But directly after fellowship, I ended up taking a job as an employed physician in a hospital that was only about 5 minutes from where we lived. So it was a little
Great.
hospital, you kind of like right down the road, didn't have the best reputation. You either kind of loved it or you didn't, as far as the community there. Like some people were very loyal to it. Other people were like, no, I wouldn't go there. I've got to go, to like maybe the hospital where where I worked most recently. But anyway, so
What did
they
you
were.
think?
What's that?
What did,
Actually, it was fine. I mean, it
okay.
just, there weren't, top-notch doctors in every specialty, but I mean, they did a good job for the, facility that it was. I mean, they had their limits, and, if it was something they couldn't handle, they sent it away, so I think it was, an appropriate, like small, like, kind of community hospital. And they were kind of in the process of potentially losing. They only had one orthopedic surgeon who was working
Mm,
there, and he wasn't employed by the hospital. He was in a private practice, but, just was there affiliated with the hospital. There was an attached office building, and that's where he was. But he was thinking about leaving, and it just kind of worked out that they needed somebody, and there weren't a whole lot of people flocking to that area, for many reasons. And so I was able to get the position there. And since it was just going to be me, I did a hospital employed position. So they set up, a little office for me and everything. I had 2 employees. I had someone who was like front desk and did like a little bit of everything, and then someone else who was more like clinical, like a medical assistant. And it was just the 3 of us, and we had this little office, and they had, the surgeon who left, some of his patients ended up kind of staying because that's where they wanted to be. So I had, kind of a fairly steady stream of people coming in, even from the beginning. But it was a little bit nerve wracking, like being in practice by myself directly out of fellowship like that. But the convenience of it being not an overwhelmingly busy place, and
hmm.
then also being like, 5 minutes down the road from home, it made good sense for me. And so I had a good experience there. I grew my practice. I got busier. By the year after the first year, I hired a PA, a physician assistant. And then as I was getting into like the mid part of that second year, continuing to get busy and doing pretty well, and starting to, learn more about the other docs in the area and like the docs that I ended up joining, and started to have some people talk to me about, hey, like you should, including my group that I joined, we're looking for somebody too, like, do you want to come? And, that type of conversation started happening. And then because I was getting busy where I was, they were looking to hire another doc, and they were having a really hard time. Again, like I said, it wasn't the location or the hospital that most people, were looking for. It just
Hmm.
happened to work out for me. And so I was seeing that, the quality of candidates we were getting was not great, and I wasn't really going to have a say in it. And this was going to have to be my partner. I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. So right around that same time, I kind of got recruited by the group I joined, and I was like, this is the perfect time to make a change. So yeah, so I was only at that hospital for 2 years, and I did a little bit more of general orthopedics because it was just me, but I still was able to cultivate a little bit of a sports medicine practice there. And then so that was from 2004 to 2006.
Okay.
And in 2006, I joined the group that I did just leave not too long ago.
Now, how close was that group to where you were living at the time?
So that was, it's about 40 minutes. So yeah,
Okay.
so I lived it's like an area called Southern Chester County.
Hmm.
It's about 35 to 40 minutes from where I work, where I, ended up working. But then even with that group in Westchester, we had multiple offices. When I first started, we had one other office, and then ultimately we had 2 other offices. Both were closer to where I lived. So that was nice. So my schedule ultimately became in my practice that I was in the office 3 days a week, but one office in our main office in Westchester one day, and then one day in one of the offices that was closer, and then another day in another office that was closer still. So that was
Mm,
nice. So twice a week, I was really only driving either like 10 minutes, 15 minutes or
nice.
less.
Okay.
And then my OR days were in Westchester up this way. So for the next, up until like a year and a half ago, so for the next 18 years or whatever, lived there. It was great, though. It was fine. I mean, it wasn't such a hard commute. Even the days that I came to Westchester and it was like 35 to 40 minutes, not really a big deal. So,
So when you talked a moment ago about residency, when, it's just patient, 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 training, 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 and then fellowship, and your ultimate work in your first hospital, at what point, and then you go to your partnership, you go to your group.
yeah.
At what point do you start getting that, okay, this is how you manage a medical practice. This is how you manage an office. This is how you interact with patients. This is all the follow. When does that happen? And is it more of you just figure it out, or do you get some guidance there?
Yeah. So during fellowship actually was a time where we got to spend more time in the office. So that was a good, we were not in the OR every single day. So it was more depending which doctor. So during that year, there were two fellows, two of us training, and then there were four physicians that we worked with. So the year was split up like it was kind of like 2 and 2, one fellow for two docs, one fellow for two docs, and then you switched after 6 months. And so it was definitely a time where you were doing more of like a, let's say, regular schedule. You would be with, you were still covering two docs, but you probably ended up with at least one, if not two office hour days, a week during that time. So I think that was my first, other than the bits of clinic I got in residency, that was my first time of like really kind of seeing, better the like in-office patient interactions and like how to kind of do things that way. And then honestly, for me, looking back, that first couple years was a little trial by fire, but that was a time where I figured a lot of stuff out.
Hmm.
It had guidance from the hospital administration, that was helpful. I had guidance. The two people actually that worked for me had worked for the prior orthopedist. So then they had, kind of the framework of just kind of how things ran, at least there. So
Hmm.
we were able to I was able to get some help and guidance from them as well, too, because they were pretty seasoned already. They had worked for him for a number of years. So that was helpful. And then, yeah, I think some of it, some of it's almost seems maybe a little bit natural as, you
Hmm.
start to like talk with patients again, and actually have like the office visit. That maybe didn't come, wasn't necessarily a difficult thing to develop. Understanding about like a little bit more about the business of it and how to run your practice and things like that. The first 2 years, again, I didn't really have to do too much of it. I mean,
Hmm.
because I was, again, hospital employed. So
Hmm.
I didn't really pay that much attention to, I mean, the day to day stuff of how, patients were coming in and coming out and that kind of thing. Yes, a little bit, but in general, just, as far as like how things were billed or, anything like that, I didn't really have to worry about, if you will. I had a salary and that was that. And, it was fine. And then it was more when I joined my current practice, although when I joined my current practice or the practice I just left, it's hard for me to like say that because it's very fresh, but
Yeah.
they were already an established practice for, let's say, about 20 years or so in the community. So, and it was just a very classic private practice, which was, such a beautiful thing. And I realized that more as time went on and our practice evolved into different things, the beauty of just a kind of straightforward private practice. So by that point, I had, developed my way, I guess, a little bit of how, as far as being in the office and being with patients in the office. And, I always pride myself on being someone who wants to educate patients and, try to have these discussions and, take the time I need to do it within reason. I mean, obviously, we have time constraints and, appointment slots, worse now
Hmm.
than then, but even still back then. So I think I kind of figured a lot of that out along the way in my first year or two. And then once I got to this practice as well, everything was sort of kind of set up. I mean, they were running great. Like they had a very established, wonderful like practice administrator. The way they did things was, it was already kind of just humming along. So, I kind of just fell into that. And, I didn't really have to do too much, or figure out too much. I mean, I learned more as time went on a little bit, but that transition was fairly easy.
Okay, I definitely want to get into the private equity like evolution. Before I
Yeah.
get that, so now you're in with the private practice. At what kind of financial guidance do you have? Like, so okay, you did med school residency fellowship. Now you're in private practice. Okay, at what point do you get some financial guidance? Did the private practice have some financial guidance? Because it's the feedback that I hear is that it's patient outcomes and volume.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's a lot of physicians I talk to, they're like, we never get that financial education. And it could be 5, 10, or even 15 years down the road. We're like, I might want to retire someday.
Yeah.
And how's that going to look? And it's like, okay, and now am I starting from behind? It
Yeah.
then becomes overwhelming. Oh, I've got a full caseload today. When am I going to get to this? Can you describe your relationship with money and kind of, before we get to the private equity conversation,
Yeah, sure,
obviously a
sure.
huge part of it, but like your relationship with money, were you comfortable with it, uncomfortable with it? Like, tell me about that, please.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, for me, I always say I would always consider myself not particularly like business or money or kind of numbers savvy at all. I mean, I was definitely from the get go of even once starting like residency and whatnot, and then early years in practice, just like all about, just like you said, all about like taking care of the patients and all about the clinical work, and kind of thinking everything else will kind of just take care of itself and fall into place, right? And I think that can be a little bit of a problem for those of us who really have kind of the blinders on in that way and just assume, well, hey, like I'm going to be a physician. There's it's total job security. I'm always going to have a job, and I'm always going to be able to make money, and I should be able to make decent money, and make a nice living. And I think the stereotype that still exists to this day, which I think should be buried, is like the rich doctor, right? I mean, so certainly there are rich doctors, just like there are rich whom whatever lawyers and businessmen and whatever. But for a doctor, to be a quote unquote rich doctor these days, they better be doing something else than being a doctor. So I think,
Interesting.
I mean, or something else in addition to being a doctor. So,
Okay.
I went to med school completely on loans. I came from a family that provided great for us, but it's not like I came from, a big wealthy family or anything like that. So, I went to college on, or excuse me, to college on loans, but my parents paid those back. And then I went to medical school on loans. When you're in residency, of course, you're making very little money. And so you are just deferring the loan payments. I mean, during residency, I had just gotten married. So, I mean, I had, a husband and his income, but we were living in a townhouse. I had the two babies, and then at the end of residency, be faced with getting a divorce. And then all of a sudden it was like at that point. So, still young and not, very financially educated. I was like, okay, I really have nothing now, though. All I have is debt, and that's what, like my
Yeah.
ex-husband would be like, okay, so I'm marrying into all this debt, so to speak. I mean, he didn't say that in like a in a negative
Hmm.
way necessarily, but I mean that's really what I brought to the table, right?
Hmm.
Anyway, so then finishing up residency, I was, I really had nothing. I had, my whatever we were making a year, 40 grand a year or something like that.
God.
Back
Working
then.
those kind of hours.
There you go. Like 45 maybe grand a year by the time you were a chief or something like that. And then at that point, I was getting divorced. So we were selling our townhouse, had my car, I had an SUV that was paid for. So I had that. I had the furniture that was in the townhouse, and like that was about it. So I'm like, what am I going to do now? And so what happened was, and going into fellowship year, you're still, going to be working a ton for maybe just another 5 grand or maybe 10 grand more. I don't remember at that point, but very similar salary for that year. So here I am. I mean, I have nothing other than med school debt, two children, a divorce pending, a divorce in
Wow.
the works. I own my SUV. I have the furniture that in my kids' bedrooms. Everything else went to my husband. Like he sold the house and got that at the townhouse, and then like some of the other furniture we had, whatever. So I like loaded up my SUV. I mean, my parents obviously kind of came to my rescue. So they decided, because they had only moved out to Pittsburgh for me, and they had bought a house there, and they lived about 20 minutes away from where we did at that time. And then we decided, and during that time, because my ex-husband had left when my daughter was 2 months old. So she was born in September. So in November, he left. So I had a 2-month-old and a 2-year-old, and still had the whole, several months left of residency to go, my last year of residency. So my mom used to get up, be at my house, arrive, because I lived about 25 minutes away from the hospital where I worked. So she would arrive at my house at like 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. with a cup of coffee in her hand. She'd give me the cup of coffee. She'd take the baby, and I would go to work. And then, I would be there until whenever, in the evening. And then sometimes my mom would just stay overnight at my house. Sometimes I'd go to there. If she took the kids back to her house, I'd go over there, and they had an extra bedroom. I'd stay there. So it was a tough year and with the
Yeah.
back and forth, even though it was only 20 minutes. So when it came time to decide about moving back this way, moving back toward the Philadelphia area, we said, let's all move in together, because I had no other really help and I had no money. So I had nothing that, I mean, I don't know what I could have done on my own, to be honest with you. So I'm very, very fortunate that what happened was my parents bought the house that we lived in, and they for the first year, my fellowship year, the kids and I essentially lived there for free. I would pay for little things here and there, pay a bill here or there, but my parents bought the house and they, we bought this bigger house that we could all move into together. And that's how I survived my fellowship year. During my fellowship year, I got officially divorced. And then I ended up with kind of like the primary custody of my kids. And so I did get some child support, from my husband, but kind of bare minimum of what he could, of what was expected. And then the first couple years in practice, once I started to, make at least a better salary than what I was making in fellowship for sure, then I started to kind of help out more with the house and started to, kind of then at that point I had to start paying back, med school loans and everything as well. So it was a time where, my parents were, very generous and able to continue, to help us quite a bit in the next year or two. But then it was getting to a point where like my dad was kind of getting more toward retirement age and whatnot. And we're going to kind of flip the script as like I got to be more successful and start to make more money. I was going to take over more of at least like the, the bills and payments on the house and, start to do, kind of flip it back that way. And so that's kind of what happened. But in doing that, for many, many years, I had no real, I knew that I needed to try to be like saving money or perhaps investing money and whatnot, but I didn't really have a lot of extra at that point still to be doing that because I felt a certain responsibility to the household and to the house and like to kind of like pay back, even though my parents didn't really expect that. And I had these two children that, yes, I was getting some child support. And, at that age, they were still pretty young and relatively inexpensive. Of course, they get a lot more expensive too.
Yes, they do.
As time goes on, and I didn't have a great of where like how I could make extra money I had like grow. Like, and maybe that's my fault for not seeking out more, or not trying to understand more about how to invest things. And I'm a little bit more of a spender than a saver in general. Like I, definitely have that quality as well. So, there were certainly some things where I'd say, okay, let's take the trip, let's do this. And that's what I preferred to do. But through my practice, certainly we had a 401k and, when you join a private practice, you do buy into, the assets of that practice too. But the way my practice did it was across 3 to 5 years or something like that. Like, I don't remember exactly, but like, buying into the accounts receivable and whatnot of the private practice, like that was part of becoming a partner. Okay. So I did that, but that was just taking like little bits out of your like paycheck. So you didn't maybe notice it so much. And it was done across a period of time. So then you're expecting, okay, I buy into this practice. And then when I leave, there's going to be a buyout from the practice. Okay. So, and then you expect that, it's going to be somehow, even though we expected it to probably dwindle over time, that there's going to be like, let's say some kind of reward, at the end, but I expected to be there, for, my whole career, which I would have been had it not been for the private equity situation. There wasn't a huge focus on like, we're going to make lots of money in this practice and there's going to have this huge buyout at the end, but, you definitely bought into it. And then, your paycheck or your salary or whatever was really based still on your volume, but, it was very reasonable. And I, felt like I was doing well for many years. During that time, I was, of course, contributing to a 401k and getting an employer, contribution back. Our practice matched all that.
Okay.
But, I will say that I didn't even start doing fines for my kids soon enough. So I definitely was one where I was always feeling like I was playing kind of catch up a little bit and never really had so much surplus that I was like, okay, I need to like invest in real estate or I need to do this. And, I didn't seek it out, but I will say I didn't really have a lot of like guidance in that regard either.
No wingman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So great segue. So at what point do the private equity folks start making their headroads into your practice? What year does that start?
It was probably in 2019.
Okay.
Just a little quick background too.
Yeah,
so my practice
please.
was, a private practice I was the 5th person to join when I was there. We maybe grew it to about 8 people. And then, so that was like, let's say 2006 to maybe 2010, 2011. And then in that time frame, we actually joined like a super group. So that was like the first step. That had nothing to do with private equity per se, but that was a step in like that ultimately got us closer to doing this because we became part of this much larger entity. It was still a private practice. The entire large entity was a private practice, but we joined a group that was gradually bringing together multiple groups in our region. So with the goal of, having more strength in numbers, having more power to, kind of negotiate with insurance companies, hopefully get
Hmm.
some better reimbursement contracts, ancillary services. So my practice, we did not have any associated with us like physical therapy, MRI, other things that a lot of orthopedic practices will have. So this like super group provided all of that, or allowed us to do all of that. So we were a little hesitant at first to make that change, but we ultimately did do that. And then it became a good thing. Like the
Okay.
first year or two, we were not sure, but we still were actually able to run very much as our own division. So there were some things that became centralized ultimately, like the EMR, the medical records, and some of the other like billing aspects and things like that became more centralized. But still, your day to day was very much like how you wanted it to be. And we had 3 offices at this point that just our people used, and that stayed that way. And like you did, you had your region, your area, and you were kind of like say kind of left alone to do your day to day the way you wanted, which we were very happy about, because our group, we really did feel like was special. We had really worked hard to like bring in people that were, good docs, good people, good surgeons. We all got along, which is hard to find a little bit, in a surgical groups, orthopedic group. There's a lot of egos and stuff in general in ortho. It's okay, but like we were very like privileged, I think, to like really bring together a very unique group. And if you would ask anybody in our region, like they would say that, they would echo that like, we had something kind of special. So we didn't really want to lose that and lose like our identity as like who we were as a group. And we didn't, so that was a great, a huge bonus. And we thought, okay, this is good. And then we had, a couple PT centers, MRI, and it was, we were seeing the benefit of ancillary income. So
Hmm.
that was something also that I, had not had, none of us had, up until this. And that was a way, and some orthopedic practices will do more ancillary things than even what we did, but that was a very nice way to have some additional income, still providing great services. At first, I was also a little hesitant about this. Like, do we, how can we like insist that our patients go to our MRI or our PT? And we certainly couldn't, and they all didn't have to, and they all didn't. But
Hmm.
we were still confident that we had actually one of the better MRIs around, and like our PT centers were good. So I didn't have a problem, suggesting it. And if it was worked out for a patient because it was convenient, the good location, whatever, and they were happy with their care, perfect. And then, that was also helpful for us that we had, we could rely on some ancillary income that we would get monthly that would, be a nice addition to our salary, especially
Hmm.
as, also some reimbursement started to decline over time and
Hmm.
whatnot. So that was great. So fast forward to now
Hmm.
2019-ish. And that's when, so the super group is probably now about 13 or 14 divisions, probably about 75 docs, give or take, which
Wow. Okay.
included mostly orthopedic surgeons, but also a few non-operative, like a few rheumatologists, a few like
Okay.
physiatrists. Like there's a maybe 10 to 12-ish like non-operative docs, and then the rest orthopedic surgeons. So our leadership of this larger super group then comes to us around that time, 2018, 2019, and says, we've kind of taken the group as far as we can. So the next step, in order for us to continue to grow and like be the powerhouse in this region that we need to be, to have our competitors, because we've got a couple big competitors in this area. It's a fairly saturated area for
Okay.
orthopedics. We're not too far from Philadelphia. Anyway, so that's, they say this is the next step, is to put ourselves out on the market, so to speak, for private equity. And, we would have quarterly shareholder meetings. And at one of the meetings, like, this is what is brought up to us. And, everybody's kind of like, okay, I mean, there
What did
was,
you think?
yeah,
What
I
did your
thought,
gut tell you?
right when it was first described to us, I didn't really know that much about it, to be honest with you. I
Okay.
mean, so and nor did I research it nearly enough. But then the more that we continue to hear from it in subsequent meetings and hear about it in subsequent meetings, it actually sounds like it's a great deal. It sounds
Okay.
like, okay, this company is going to, whatever company it is going to come in, is going to buy us. We're going to, we've been doing great. Like we had, we're successful. So there's going to be, you're going to get as a partner, because I was, a partner, full shareholder in the big practice as well. And they're like, there's going to be a payout up front, this liquidity event, and, that'll be great. And then they're going to come in and they're going to make us, better and bigger and stronger. And we're going to be like, depending on which company it would have been, it's like we could be, then they can add to us and then they can sell us again, and whether that sounds attractive or not, I don't know. I think I was kind of indifferent to it, but the way they like phrase it all is then, that's another event where, you can make another substantial amount of money. And you start to think, especially someone like me who didn't have a lot of like investments and like extra sitting in the bank, and now had two kids that were approaching college age, and I hadn't started their 529 soon enough. So I didn't have their full college paid for already at that point. And now, one's a senior in high school and one's a sophomore in high school. And I'm like, I'm like, and they're
Yeah,
both,
it's
they're
coming.
both,
College
they're
is
both
coming.
smart, and they're both looking at schools that are, I'm sure gonna, be expensive. And then right around then, even though that's wasn't a huge player for me yet, I had also discovered this ballroom dancing hobby that I have, which is also an expensive hobby. I just did horseback riding, and so there's some expenses I have, and
Yeah.
we traveled, and I was really always about experiences, and so and that was where I always felt like, because I worked so much too, and I was a single mom, and their father was pretty much uninvolved after a period of time, and so my parents were always there though too, but like I always wanted to like give, and sometimes that could be as far as like material things to a little bit like when they started driving. Yes, you get a car. Like yes, I mean not a brand new car, but like some kids aren't guaranteed a car right when they start driving, and both of mine got cars right when they started driving, and we took some nice trips and other things like that. So anyway, back to my I'm a spender, not a saver. So that kind of came back to haunt me a little bit as we're getting to this point where I'm saying, okay, college is coming. There was no provision with our custody agreement that my ex-husband had to help for college or anything like that. So that was all me. And he was kind of fading away again at this point. So then hearing about the potential for like maybe a windfall with some, money, that I also felt like, well, gosh, I've been working really hard for,
Yeah.
19, years almost now. This would be great. And here's what we've been working for, right? Because you
Yeah.
say like, that buy-in that I did to my practice back in 2006 over those few years, like that means nothing now. Like that, we're not that practice anymore.
Yeah.
So then I'm not expecting anything there, despite, my work in the region where I am. Again, we're not orthopedic surgeons who are making $1 million a year. We're, not even necessarily close to that. I think a lot of people think we make seven figures and stuff. We don't, at least not around here.
Hmm.
So anyway, so this sounded really good. Actually,
Okay.
it actually sounded really good at the way they phrased it. Now, there was still a lot of skepticism though, because, there was question of, well, how much control do we lose? And then,
Hmm.
what's the guarantee as far as like a subsequent deal and so on and so forth. So this is all being talked about. There's some excitement brewing, and, people are like, okay, like kind of, I get it. And other people are like, well, why do we need to do this? And there
Hmm.
was a little bit, of kind of back and forth. And then it was starting to get like a little bit more serious in 2019. And then 2020 rolls around and the pandemic, hits. And so then a lot of the interest and a lot of what was going on, with regard to the potential for a sale and whatnot really died down quite a bit. But apparently there was like one or maybe two companies that kind of stayed, active in the process and kind of doing their due diligence. And then, fast forward a little bit, and one of those companies was the company that we actually did the deal with. And
Okay.
then that happened in 2022.
Okay.
There were many meetings, some that all shareholders were present at, some that was just like board members or, other committees that were developed around this transaction. But, we were involved to a certain degree, but I think everything that we were being told, particularly told as a group, was all like everything's going to be just wonderful, was all like the positive aspects of, what to expect in the future. Hey, you're going to get this money up front and, so on and so forth. But even as we got, kind of closer to the actual like kind of deal itself, the realization was, hey, like this money up front really isn't so much money. There's going to be a, management fee that we're going to be paying back, that they're paying this company, that essentially negates the money that you're getting up front over time. So, there was a decent amount of skepticism, especially in some of the younger guys, about whether or not this was really like a good plan for our future.
Yeah.
And maybe there was no way to know for sure, but I will tell you, like the way our deal was structured, basically everybody was getting like an individualized, kind of payout
Hmm.
based on your salary for the year prior. Like, so it was looking at
Hmm.
2021's numbers, everybody had their own, packets and their own things. And it was quite the process. And then what that amounted to for most was basically a year's salary.
Okay.
So your payment out, your payout or whatever you want to call it, was a year's salary, with the understanding that this is a 5-year contract and the management fee to the company is 25% off the top for 5 years.
Okay.
So if you really do the math, and that's pretty simple math, and you look at that, you say, okay, so I'm paying back, 125% of my salary, back to this company. So this money that I'm getting up front really essentially gets all paid back, if my salary stays the same. But
Mm-hmm.
then they're saying, well, no, your salary, we expect income repair is the term, that is used
Okay.
within a year, maybe 2 years tops, because of all the great things we're going to do for you. And we're going to make your practice that much more productive. And we're going to add this thing and this thing. And we're going to, we have this infrastructure that's so wonderful. And we're going to come and drop it into your practice. And, you're going to see, that you're going to be, again, a year, maybe two tops, you're going to be making what you were making minus that, you're going to be back over that scrape and beyond that, and then they started with some stories and some examples, of other practices they had worked with and docs that are, making so much money from their surgery centers and other things because now, they've brought those up to a level where they're being even more productive. They're building additional surgery centers, like all of these things that sound great in theory and sound like, okay, like we are going to be able to do well and this is a great deal. Then the problem is if that doesn't happen the way they say, it could be quite a different outcome, which was kind of our situation. So when you go into it, in my situation, as someone who is really trying desperately to fulfill her children's 5 twins and get them, set up for school, because now you fast forward. So my one daughter went to Emerson in Boston. Both my kids ended up at private schools, very expensive. I had pretty much been able to finish the 529, for the first one, and she got a partial academic scholarship, which was hugely helpful that I, couldn't count on for sure, but got very lucky there. My other daughter went to NYU. So, both of these schools are 70, 75 grand a year, plus other expenses. And I didn't have the second ones fully funded.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking, okay, so, some of this money, I'm going to, put that
Mm-hmm.
right in there, finish funding that. Okay, that's great. I, again, have this dance habit that we could talk a little bit more about that, it became a little bit more expensive because it became international due to the pandemic. So I'm going to put some money aside so that I can kind of continue to do that and, maybe pay off a couple other things that, we're just kind of sitting there and then, say, well, cause that's no problem. Like I can use this money. We were also transitioning from living in the house where we were and separating. Like my parents and I had been empty nesting together for a few years in this big house that really didn't make sense anymore. And so we ended up a year and a half ago, and again, I used some of that additional money for this purpose that we sold that house. I didn't give, I mean, it was together our house, but like my parents took the majority of the profit from that house as they were deserved to buy their next house. And then I, bought a townhouse is where I live now, a
Mm-hmm.
little bit closer to where I work, and used some of that money to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line is stupidly, looking back. Okay. But at that point, maybe just feeling like, okay, this is kind of the windfall I've been waiting for. Like, it's not, again, like changing money for me right now, but it's money that comes at a time where I can use it as a down payment for this house.
Yeah.
I can get my second daughter's 529, fully funded. I can have a little money set aside for, my dance expenses. And then I'm going to work hard. At the time, I'm 54 now. At the time I was, 51, whatever. I said, I'm going to, continue to work hard. I'm at the prime of my career, busy as all get out in this community. I developed a nice reputation for myself. I'm like, there's no way I'm not going to be able to crank it out and continue to, make my same income. And then, they're kind of promising us more if you keep doing what you're doing, and then they're going to help us do more. So I'm like, I'm good. This is great,
Yeah.
And so for me, it did actually seem like it was going to be a good thing. And then, I'm in retrospect. I mean, I'll say this to anybody now, and I've said it multiple times to my partners or other people I'm talking about. Like, I wish I never did any of it. Like, I wish I would not have paid the last year of my daughter's college, cash. I wish I had, I love this townhouse and what we, where I live now and what we needed to do to like separate and whatnot. But like, I would have bought something different or maybe waited a little longer, or, there's things I would have done differently if I would have known what was going to happen, because I did not have the reserves or another source of income that was going to be able to pick up the difference when all of a sudden what was promised and what we thought was going to happen is not happening. In fact, quite the opposite was happening. So
When did you start sensing the wheels were
after,
kind of coming off the bus?
after the first year, I
Okay.
would
Yeah.
say. Yeah.
That quickly.
Oh, yeah. So,
Did your other partners get that? Did they also feel the same too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some remained a little bit more optimistic than others. And, and I even probably wasn't the most cynical, if you will, or the most negative of the group, but I was close.
Okay.
And then ultimately, I think I became the most, maybe just because of the situation that I got myself into with it. And so yeah, but probably after about the first year, because I think the first year was kind of what we anticipated. The first
Hmm.
year, everybody's salary had been kind of set from the year, prior. And then we expected that we would have that 25%, scrape. And then we didn't necessarily expect to, be, doing anything else that was going to offset that in that first year. So everybody kind of prepared for that, and I was prepared for that. Even with the things that I did with some of the money that received up front, I was still like, I wasn't in dire straits at that
Hmm.
point. So then, they were fairly hands off in the first year. Like a lot of the things that we thought were maybe going to start to change, or things that they had, let's say, quote unquote, like, promised or talked about, almost nothing changed in the first year. Like they weren't really a presence. They weren't really around. Like we kind of just did our same thing, but there was certainly money leaving the practice every month with these management fees that we
Hmm.
were paying. And so we just, they were saying that there was a lot of things that they were working on in the background. Like those were kind of the terms we used to hear a lot. And then one of the things that they needed to do was every division in the group had like a different compensation model, different plan of how they paid the doctors and whatnot. So they needed to kind of unify all of that in some way. And, the parts that we used to still do in a divisional way, which we liked, they didn't like. Now we needed to be like, which I get, like we needed to be one big group. And then
Hmm.
6 months into our acquisition, they acquired another group in our region that was another like 20 to 25 surgeons. So now we're like a group of like 90 docs,
Hmm.
and they're trying to like consolidate all this and make it one practice. And I think perhaps in their defense, it was a bigger job than they anticipated. However, the due diligence, if you will, for this was going on since 2019,
Yeah.
2020. So I would think, if this is something that they do, that, they would understand what they were getting themselves into on their side of it, with all that amount of time to, let's say, prepare. I mean, I don't know how many other deals they may have been working on concurrently. Nonetheless, I mean, we were a big one. I mean, we were
Hmm.
definitely one of the larger practices that they ever acquired. Anyway, so then if you get into that second year is when now they're trying to like, start to like change things a bit, start to change the compensation models and whatnot. And we're then starting to realize that, there's been nothing done that is increasing our revenue though.
Hmm.
So, we don't have any, additional surgery centers. And some of the docs that didn't operate in our surgery centers that we already had haven't really changed their schedules. There hasn't been enough, so there was a little bit of stuff on our end that probably could have been done better as well. We had some docs that also seemed to slow down a little bit more. Some of the docs are a little bit older. Maybe that was their plan all along, which is fair enough, but that also was perhaps not accounted for as well as it should have been. So now we're this one big happy family, kind of. And the docs that are continuing to produce and produce, including my whole division, are now also kind of subsidizing some of the other docs because everything's being looked at as one huge group instead of the divisional model. Okay.
Gotcha. Okay.
So then
Okay.
that becomes a bit of a bitter pill to swallow as someone who is working as hard, if not harder, than had been. And then we do have some members of the group that, may have, again, been on a path to slow down anyway, fine, or may have not been as productive from the get go. And we knew there was variation from the start. But
Yeah.
now it's being all kind of looked at as one. And then when there's nothing else happening to offset that, there's no improvements in any kind of like infrastructure, marketing, nothing else from an ancillary side that's improving, then all of a sudden, the revenue's just going this way instead of this way.
Plus
But
the management fee they're taking.
the management fees aren't going down.
Yeah.
In fact, they're going up because there's a floor. There's an amount of money that they expect to receive. And it's not just the percentage. I mean, it's that amount. So that means the percentage is rising to meet that amount. So then we get to a point, not once since we did the deal, are we at 25%. We're more at 29% or something higher than that because
Boy.
we're not meeting that floor. So then, it compounds the problem and everybody starts to be, a bit more bitter especially those of us that are like working at or even above where we were when the deal was done, because we see then you are even more so the hamster on the wheel, because then the only answer that we are given from, the administration and the executive level is you need to work harder. You need to see more patients. Like you
Oh,
need,
brother.
but all of us, not just
Yeah.
anybody who was, let's say, maybe underperforming. It's everybody. And when you're already at or above like your maximum capacity of what you can do, you're already working 7 a.m. in the morning till 5 p.m. and then coming home and doing charts for 2 hours because you can't get them done during the day, and saying like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
There's no way. You can only squeeze so much out of that towel. Like there's no way
Absolutely.
to get more out of you, but yet that's the only answer. Not, oh, let us drop the management fees a little bit or suspend them for a few months, or, oh, wait, let us get some programs in place here that are going to start to drive this revenue back so we can kind of get close to what we promised you. Oh no. Oh no, there has not been one concession the whole time. And it just went from bad to worse, such that we were essentially, if you can include the management fees plus our just regular overhead for running the practice, docs are making or paying 80% ish overhead, when typically, a doc in private practice is going to pay 50 to 60% overhead, most likely is kind of the average number, but we're up at 80%, or even more than that. Some months docs are bringing home paychecks that you would just kind of, we would normally, just scoff at, like,
Yeah.
this is not, does not value the work that we're doing. And then the compensation model was then changed again, and nothing, it was always changed for the worse. Like the people that, were making the, changes, I mean, nothing was happening obviously to their management fees, their salaries, but the docs, the shareholders, just were consistently essentially penalized for, what was going on. So it was just them extracting their management fees and whatever else they wanted. I mean, got to a point where we were on credit hold with vendors.
Wow.
Even like routine things we used in our office, like McKesson is a big company that does a lot of medical supplies,
Hmm.
gauze, tape, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we'd be on credit hold with McKesson. We couldn't pay the people who cleaned our office. We couldn't throw a holiday party unless it came out of the doc's pocket. We couldn't get like, one of our offices desperately needed carpet replaced for years and years. We've been trying, we never got around to it. And then now, like, we just couldn't do it. Like our specific office manager was asking about like replacing carpet for over a year, and there was, no funds to do that. So it is, just unfathomable what really happened to our practice, despite the fact that, like, we kept working and doing the best we could, in
Yeah. You
environment that
still have
was,
patients coming in.
yeah, for sure. And I will say that's the other piece, of course, is that then some of the things that they started to implement and started to do on the clinical side.
Hmm.
For example, we had to all consolidate to a different EMR,
Hmm.
the EMR this main company uses. And fine, like, and that's fine. Like, we had
Yeah.
already done a new EMR once, and if there's some benefit to this, we weren't in love with the EMR we were using. Was this one maybe slightly better, but that's a big transition to do. And then like just a few months later, or maybe even less than that, they decided to like centralize the call center so that all the calls coming in for all these 90 docs were coming into one place. And they didn't think, there was not enough forethought, there were not enough people, they were not trained well enough. It was a complete disaster. We kept giving the feedback that it was a complete disaster, and it would just fall on deaf ears, because whatever metrics they were looking at about the phone calls at least being answered on their computer screens or their spreadsheets looked fine. Meanwhile, you have patients constantly, we're putting out fires every single day with patients that are, upset that they couldn't get through. The people they talk to don't
God.
know what they're talking about. They don't get messages returned, all this. And we're trying, so we start, some of us already had done it, like give out our cell phone numbers. Our PAs are giving out their cell phone numbers. We are pretty well known in the community. So like people are like running into us in the grocery store or whatever and be like, hey, like I need an appointment. Like what's going on with your
What's
office?
going
Like,
on? Yeah.
this is crazy. I had a long-term patient of mine who, I'm actually like friends with. Our kids went to school together, ended up going to another office, and then ultimately like another practice. And then ultimately came back to me, and said, I mean, I knew I wasn't going to be happy. And like, but I just like, I couldn't get through. People weren't calling me back. And like, just the transparency or lack of, the layers that it took to try to even get an answer. I mean, our office manager would say, it would take multiple emails to, even try to get a response from somebody at like corporate. And, everything is now run through corporate, and, corporate's in another state, and corporate's got, all these other practices they're dealing with, I guess. And it just was a bit of a nightmare, continues to be, to the point where me, after almost 19 years. 6 months ago, I resigned. I
You saw
resigned
it was, you had
practice.
enough.
Yeah. And I just finished 3 weeks ago, to the point where I could barely survive on what I was making monthly, despite the fact that I was doing, as many, if not more cases, seeing as many patients as I ever had. And the reserves were gone. I mean, again, I took the initial money and used some of it for the reasons that I discussed earlier. And anything else I didn't have another source of income. I don't have a real estate investment. I don't have other investments that are pouring money into some other account. I don't have like a deal with a device company, like some, orthopedic surgeons work with, device companies or things, or consultants or, do other things or teach and this and that. I didn't have any of that. Like I worked, 50, 60 hours a week, as an orthopedic surgeon, like taking care of patients. And that's what I did. And then even though my kids are grown now, I mean, I was that, and I was a mom, this whole
Yeah.
time. And so, and even with my adult kids now, I would be spending time when they're in college, like going to, try to see them on the weekends or this and that, like do
Yeah,
things.
sure.
I have my parents that are now getting a little bit older, and like they don't rely on me. They're totally independent, but I mean, I'm close to them, and I see them and still I help them with things. So that's my life in addition to my dance. And so that's what I do for me, which, again, is great that I have that. And I'm very fortunate to have that. But I got to a point where I could not sustain my life. I mean, I was getting to a point where I was going to have to sell my house that I just bought.
Oh,
And
good
I'm like,
Lord.
this is, and people, I mean, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
I'm
Did
not
some of your partners leave
who
too?
has resigned. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm the most senior person who has resigned. So
Okay.
I think it opened some eyes. But yeah, I mean, I stayed for 6 months once I resigned, because I have, a big practice, a lot of patients and a lot of stuff I still wanted to do, and a lot of people I still wanted to try to help.
Yeah.
And then once we got out so this marks the 3-year anniversary of the deal. And so
Okay.
there was also less penalty, less issues if you left at
That
three
was my
years.
next question. Was there
Yeah.
a
So there
buyout that you
still
had to
was,
pay
yeah.
back?
Right. So yeah. So that most people who left, and I don't know the exact number now, but there's 3 of us from my actual division. So maybe 10 to 12 people have resigned thus far, something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
But most people did wait until the 3-year mark, even though, people were miserable before that. Many people, I'd say the majority of people who are still working there are also varying degrees of miserable.
Yeah.
But the 3-year mark allowed you to leave with less of a penalty. If you left before 3 years, you were expected to pay back the money that you received initially. And then if you left at 3 years, it dropped to 40% of the money you received initially. However, because we also have like stock in the parent company and shares in the MSO and things like that, that value offset, you would forfeit that. And
Okay.
then that value of that, the entity, the stock, the MSO shares, whatever, pretty much offset what anyone would owe back in the 40% range.
Got it.
Essentially, the 3-year mark leaving for most people would be kind of a wash. Like, you're
Mm-hmm.
not getting anything for it, but you're also not, let's say, losing anything
Losing
for it.
anything either.
So, yeah.
So
So that's where I am.
yeah. I mean, so how does it feel? I mean, how does it feel to have, I mean, is this the first 3 week vacation you had, first 3 weeks off you had like ever?
Probably yes. I mean, I did 2 weeks a couple times, but yeah, I mean, usually it would just be a week or less. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, I
Yeah.
was very, very devastated to leave, because this is, the place I thought I would practice, I don't know, maybe 10, like I said, I'm 54, maybe 10 more years or so or whatever. And I love my partners, in my immediate division, especially, again, like I said, we were kind of a special thing for a long time. I really, I've become like kind of a, I don't know, like this community, like I'm a known entity in this community. And,
Yeah.
21 years total of working in this community, I have developed a nice reputation. I feel like I have a lot of, people I've taken care of in the community that kind of like relied on me and depended on me.
Yeah.
And I found that out much more in the last like few months as I was, having conversations with patients that I was leaving. Patients were a lot more upset about it than I anticipated, because you feel like you're an orthopedic surgeon, and I know I do things that change people's lives, but I often tell people like I'm not a life and death doctor, and I like it that way, and I'm also not a primary care doctor, that people see maybe more regularly. But as an orthopedic surgeon, I think, you really do give people their lifestyle back a lot of times. You
100% you do.
restore movement. You do a lot of impactful things, and I
Yeah.
know that. But I think I really like it was really shown to me in great with a great impact over the past few months. as I saw the reactions of people that, I mean, I tend to be chatty. I mean, you can see it's easy for me to talk and talk and talk. But,
Yeah.
and like, I've really felt like I've gotten to know a lot of my patients. I've taken care of families, generations of families. They know about me, patients are interested in my daughters and whatnot. And so I feel like there's a lot of people that, and there's some patients I've, straight out become friends with over this time. So people were really, upset. And there's certainly people I've taken care of multiple times, just that patient replaced both shoulders or, did
Man.
this or that, things like that. So that, even though I'm not a primary care doc that people are going to, necessarily see routinely every 6 months or once a year, we do end up having a lot of patients that also come in routinely. Also, maybe if we're doing like non-operative treatment for arthritis or something, coming in for injections periodically or whatever. So it really did hit me, like, the impact that I had, and that the impact that would be had when I left.
Yeah.
So that was hard. Like, as much as I was happy to, and knew that I made the right decision to get away from this situation, I knew that I had to. I mean, I had no choice. Like, I
Yeah.
needed to
You're forced into it.
figure out some other way to make money.
Yeah.
And I can't be strapped into, a job where you have to be physically present for 10 to 12 hours a day and not have the opportunity, and then be like so tired that I mean, I had like a little side hustle that I was trying to work on for a while, but never really took off, never really got it anywhere, because I just, kind of didn't have the time to devote to it. So I'm like, I started networking, which, that I kind of put that bug in my head probably last summer. And that's when I started to become a lot more active on LinkedIn, and started to, like, what a great decision that was. Boy, I started to meet, so many wonderful people, and the opportunities started to present themselves. And so I'm like, okay, it opened my eyes to, like, okay, there's other things that you can do. Not that I want to not ever be a doctor again. I mean, I'm a doctor, and like, I do wanted to get back to that at some point, but it also started to open my eyes to, like, this is what you should have done before.
Mm.
Talking to my younger self, be like, this is what you should have done. You should have seen, where there might be other opportunities for you, see other ways that you can, even use your skills and your knowledge, and monetize that, or look at, there's other opportunities. Because again, I wasn't going to be able to survive continuing to work like this for the money I was making. In order for me to leave and be like, okay, now on my, like, sort of 3 week, vacation, is that I had to take an early distribution from my 401k with all the penalties that come with that. And, it was not something that I really wanted to do. I mean, my dad was trying to convince me, don't do that, we'll figure something out. And I'm like, you know what? This is a situation that I got myself into, but I didn't, like, some of this was out of my control. Like, I didn't
Yeah.
expect this, I didn't expect it at
Who
all.
would have thought this would evolve like that?
Could I have planned differently from the beginning? Absolutely. But, like, hindsight, right? Hindsight's 2020. You
100%.
don't know.
100%.
And so that's what it came to. And I'm like, okay, like, kind of like, I got myself into this mess, I'm going to get myself out. And so I became much more, I started to educate myself more. I started to educate myself more on the whole, like, private equity situation
Mhm.
too. And I'm like, I certainly wish I would have done that sooner. Would that have changed what happened in my practice? No. Would my one voice have made, like, that big of a difference? Or, would that deal have not happened? No, I don't believe that at all. But would I have had a better understanding of what could happen in the future, of how, hey, this doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily going to follow this trajectory. You just don't know. It's
Yeah.
wonderful if it does, but if it doesn't, then you got to be ready for that. And,
Yeah.
like, and a lot of us weren't ready for that. I mean, there's plenty of stories of home equity loans, people taking money out of their kids' 529s, people selling houses, people, like, just scraping by, like, like, and as still, as like a busy orthopedic surgeon, you say, what is wrong with this picture? Something
System.
is definitely wrong with this. Like, what we do is highly valuable. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying I need to be making millions of dollars. Bravo to the surgeons that still can, in whatever their situation is or have been, but I should be making, like, what I'm worth, like,
100%.
and I should not have to, like, I'm not so extravagant that, like, I feel like I never was. Like, yes, I mean, like I said, vendor rather than a saver, like to
Mhm.
take care of my kid, like to do these things, and certainly, but I don't have a lot of, like, all this excess that, I think a lot of people perceive that we do. So, it can really get to a point where, even as a busy orthopedic surgeon at age 54, like I'm living month to month, and, like, that's not a good feeling.
Yeah. So what's next? What's the next
Yeah.
move?
So there's some different things. I'm kind of right now. Actually, I've been surprisingly busy on these. Like busier than I thought I was going to be in these like 3 weeks since I've been unemployed. Like I say, I'm like unemployed, but really my job is creating my next thing is
Yeah.
how I look at it now. So there's been again through the connections and things I've made on LinkedIn, I've had a lot of opportunities kind of come my way for different like consulting type things, and so there's some options there for things that wouldn't necessarily be full-time work, but I'm again kind of looking at things that I can diversify a little bit. I ultimately would like to be in private practice again, and we have a non-compete and all of that, so that would be probably a year and a half to 2 years away,
Okay.
something along those lines. But I'm also interested in like other services and other things that I can do as an orthopedic surgeon that are kind of an offshoot of what we do. Like I have a big interest in like health and wellness type, services and other things. So I'm thinking about wanting to maybe go in that direction, that, something that doesn't violate my non-compete, yet I can still stay in my community and still offer some things that, would be of interest, to the people that I've already kind of served for all these years as an orthopedic surgeon. And then, maybe dovetail back into,
Hmm.
combining that with an orthopedic practice, down the road a little bit. I've had the little side hustle that I mentioned that I've had since
Which is
the
that?
past 5 years. That's called The Working Mom. So it was a platform that I developed with my best friend, who's a vascular surgery PA, that we worked at the same hospital for many years. And we both were kind of dealing with a little bit of just burnout in medicine, like around that time that this private equity thing was kind of starting, pre
Hmm.
private equity, like again, that's like 2018, 2019 time. And we thought like, we need to figure out something else to do. So, I mean, I had that thought back then, but just thinking I wanted to get out of medicine, not thinking about the financial aspect of it, not thinking that I was about to be financially ruined with this private equity deal, but thinking, I don't know if I want to, be a practicing physician until retirement age. So anyway, so we started
Hmm.
this platform that we had a really hard time like focusing and getting a direction, but we thought, what else do we know how to do? Like we've been working moms, we're both single working moms. We know how to like kind of manage. And, people would often ask me with my kids, like, kind of how did you do it? Because
Yeah.
they turned out pretty great. If I be a little biased, but they turned out pretty great. And of course, I had a lot of help from my parents, but I got that question a lot. And so it made me think like there are things I did and things I, insisted upon and strategies I used and, things that I could share with other people and maybe help. And, younger moms, like our PAs, a lot of our PAs are like 10 years younger than me, so then they would, were coming through and having kids and like, would kind of look to me, I think, as sort of a little bit of a mentor in that realm.
Sure.
So then, we started a blog, and then we decided like, let's see what we can do with this. And it was very much a kind of side hustle thing, very much a, when we have some time, we'll, get super active and write a bunch of blog entries. And then like 3 or 4 months will go by and we won't do anything. And so we developed a logo, we had that trademarked, we actually have some merchandise, and we did some expos and other things. And then like it would just go dormant for like, another 3, 4 months. And then we try to get some momentum again, try to grow on social media, do all the things you're supposed to do, you need to do. And we didn't really know 100% where we were headed. Well, in the past year, we decided to write a book and put our strategies and put our information into a book. It's kind of like just a little handbook, and it literally just came out like last week. So,
Cool.
so the timing could be really nice for that to maybe start to, turn into a little something. So we're trying to once again get a little bit more active, on social media, promote the book. It's just, again, a short handbook about
Hmm.
like, again, some strategies and advice. We call it Navigate it, and we kind of narrowed our niche to working moms in healthcare.
That was my next question. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's called Navigating the Life Cycles of Working Moms in Healthcare. And
Okay.
so this is the first in what we plan to actually write a series, that kind of takes you kind of chronologically through, kind of the steps of raising kids in medicine and
In
working in
your
medicine.
world.
So yeah, some of it certainly can be applicable to any working mom, but we're trying to see if we can kind of speak to, those that were like kind of in the trenches with you or have been, especially myself now. I mean, my friend and business partner in this, she has one daughter who's 17.
Hmm.
My kids are soon to be 25 and 23. So I've kind of been through it all, to the, mom of adults and empty nester phase. So I think,
Yeah.
have some good perspective to draw from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So I'm
sounds
hoping that, yeah, hoping that'll kind of take off maybe a little bit too. And I can actually devote more consistent time to it now. So, yeah. So a few things in the works. We'll see.
yeah. How much has dancing been the stress reliever during this turbulence?
Yeah. So huge. So I will say it's been both. It's been stressful, but also a stress reliever. Stressful for the fact that the way I do my dance now is a little bit non-traditional and it involves a good bit of travel. And so then, when I can, so
Yeah.
the going through when I started dancing, to back up
This
just
is
a
about
little.
7 years ago, you said?
7 years ago. So I started
Okay.
dancing in 2018. So again, that's when my oldest was a senior in high school. And I really I've been divorced since 2003. I never got remarried. I dated a little, but not a lot. I was really just focused on, really work and my kids. And that's the way I wanted it. And that's the way I've liked it. And it's been, a really great, I've been very fortunate, great life. But then I realized that like something is going to be missing a little bit once the kids are off to college. And I didn't want them to have to like worry about me or feel like they in any way had to like hold back from anything because their mom's going to be lonely or whatever. Like not at all. Like luckily I've been in this community for, I have a nice social life. I have friends, but I was like, what else can I do? And we had always been fans of watching Dancing with the Stars, the TV show. And that definitely impacted us. And me, my mom, and my girls used to watch it religiously. We used to vote, all the things, and then we went to some of the live performances that they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're just like enthralled by it and just really got into it. And I was not a dancer before. Like I played sports, I played lacrosse, and I used to do some horseback riding, but, was not really a dancer. And it was definitely like a different world, so, but I just loved watching it. And then one of my partners and his wife used to take lessons just for social dancing at a studio near where we worked. And I thought about it and I was like, yeah, like, and they're like, you don't need a partner to go. I mean, there's teachers there and whatever, and they do parties and this and that. So anyway, I ended up just going just to like learn social dancing and see, something to do for fun, meet some other people, whatever. And then I didn't even know that you could do like the pro-am competitions, the things that I do now. I had no idea that even existed. And so I went to the studio, got matched up with my teacher, learned about competitions, and then I went and like watched one and saw it. I was like, this is amazing. I had no idea you could do this. I saw a lot of women who were really serious about it, and guys. I mean, it's a little more popular for a female student dancing with a male teacher, but you certainly see male students dancing with a female teacher, and all ages, all shapes and sizes, all everything. Like it's a really cool world, but it is kind of an expensive hobby. There's, the competition, like competing is expensive, and like, the dresses, the hair, the makeup, all of it is, and even taking lessons can be a little bit expensive. So, definitely it was where, I don't have a beach house or some other thing. It was like my thing, so, and then fast forward a little bit, my teacher is Italian. He was here on a work visa. And then when COVID came, he went home and stayed home. So, since 2020, we've done a long distance, kind of pro-am
Yeah.
relationships. Yeah. So it's very non-traditional. And it is 100% my outlet. Like I absolutely fell in love with dancing. I have a great connection with my teacher. He's wonderful. It was super challenging to like learn something new. I was 46 when I started. And so it's definitely not easy. And so it was really, at times I thought, I don't know if I'm ever going to be good enough or be able to dance the way like I want to, but it's something that really taught me about, like consistency and just kind of sticking with it. And then also like overcoming challenges and struggles because he stayed home. Kept living, he lives in Italy and
Yeah.
I here, obviously. And
So how do you
so
practice?
we practice via Zoom.
Okay.
So yeah, so we figured it out. I mean, it was just right during the early COVID time when like everything was shut down. Some of the dance studios kind of started doing this and figuring out that you could try to do lessons like virtually on Zoom. And so he and I had talked about trying to continue an independent partnership and figure out like how that would work and what that looked like and see what we could do like on Zoom. And sure enough, it was not so easy right in the beginning, but like we figured it out. And so I take 3 lessons a week with him on Zoom. I actually had been and will continue to because we're all friends, use my office waiting room. One of my offices has like the biggest office has a big waiting room with a wood floor. So I move the chairs out of the waiting room. There's a space that I can put my computer like on a coat rack and he can see into the room. And then we do 2-hour lessons 3 times a week via
Wow.
Zoom. And I dance on my own, like, and I'm at a level now. And really, even though I was, we started this 5 years ago where I'm at a higher level now than I was then, but I can do my steps and do the steps of our routine, like by myself. There's certain steps that might be a little harder where I require like some support for a certain turn or pose or something like that. But in general, it's actually made me a stronger dancer because I have to be able to do everything everything by myself. I have my own balance, my own, understand exactly the directions of all the steps and what the way things go. And it's just become our way. And then I travel to Italy. I usually, basically, when I was working, using all my vacation for the most part for dance. So I would go to Italy about 4 times a year, like for a week or 10 days. And then when we go there, we'll dance, like train in the studio where he is there now for like 6 hours a day. Like, I get my week with him and we do all day. And then we do a competition, usually like on the, maybe 3, 4 days we train, do a competition, maybe have another day or two before I then have to come home. So we kind of developed a routine now of competing mostly in Europe and a little bit in Canada too. And so it's been amazing to continue with that. Amazing to get, like, I really feel like I'm at a level now where it was always fun, but it's so much more fun now because I'm just at a little bit of a higher level and really like feel like kind of dancing, doing really nice choreography that he creates for us and everything. So it's really fun to be out on the competition floor. It's stressful in that, I couldn't take as much time as I had wanted to, like recently, just because of the work situation. Like, so we haven't been able to dance in person as much as like we had like a couple years before. It's stressful because it's an expense. I mean, and so I had to change that to some degree. I couldn't and didn't want to cut it out entirely.
Right.
And also, like, my teacher and I have this, like, again, like agreement and relationship and connection and whatnot, that like I don't want to lose that. And it's special what we do. And so I needed to be able to like afford to continue to do that. So there was some stress on it, on that aspect of it, of just being like, I feel like I had to, watch everything I was doing from a spending standpoint. And I didn't want that to have to suffer too much. But on the other hand, it was kind of a luxury. If something needed to go or change, that was the thing. But other than that, yes, I mean, it is my escape, and it is just really, it's nice. It's a complete, another world from my world,
Yeah,
So
totally.
and like, and now with the travel and being able to, like, I go back, he lives in a small town in Tuscany, and that's where I go, and I just stay in this little hotel when we're there, and I know the people in the hotel now. I don't speak Italian yet, but I have some phrases I can sort of get by. And then, his girlfriend and their son, they're like, I'm close to them, and it's just like, it's been a really fun experience to be able to like also be immersed a little bit in, another place, even if it's just a few times a year. The travel part of it has been really cool.
Yeah. Now, when you meet up with your teacher,
Yeah.
when's the next competition?
Actually, in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, in Italy.
It's coming up very soon. Yeah. So we haven't competed. Usually we try to do 4, maybe 5 a year if I
Okay.
could, depending on the year. So we last competed and saw each other in person in February.
Okay.
And so I'm actually going to Italy in just about 2 weeks. Yeah, on the 16th. So I fly overnight, 15th into the 16th, and we have a competition like the following weekend.
Now, when you first meet up with them again, does it take you like a lesson or two to like get back in sync because you're doing a little bit?
A little bit, kind of depends on the style of the dance. We do several different dances. So dances where we have to be like fully in connection. It takes maybe, like the first lesson, the first hour or so, like kind of just to get back to it. But we were surprised, even like the first time we got back together after being apart for like 6 months, that it was a lot easier than we thought to kind of like just back at it. Yeah, like we thought it was going to be hard, and actually, and now it's been kind of our routine for so long that.
It's probably the good chemistry you guys have.
Yeah, we've been through a lot to maintain this partnership. So yeah, we have a really nice friendship, nice connection. So
where can people find more information about your book?
Yeah, so we have a website. I mean, that the book is available on Amazon right now. So yeah, so you could like search on Amazon. We are on social media, basically on all the platforms. I share a little bit about it on LinkedIn. So like my personal LinkedIn, we also have the Working Mom, LinkedIn has a LinkedIn page. We're probably most active on Instagram. So, we could find us on Instagram. We share a lot there. Facebook. And then our website it's a dot. So it's theworkingmom.us.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
And I'll put all that information into the link when we do this. So this is listen, I think you could be doing a TED talk with all this, and the old saying is iron sharpens iron type of thing with all the things you've been through. But I could definitely see why people would look to you as a mentor.
Oh, thanks.
But I really appreciate it. I loved our conversation today.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah, this was awesome. I appreciate you sharing with all your stories and all your experiences.
I know. Hope I didn't ramble on too much.
No, it was perfect. It was exactly what I think. There's so much there for people to hold on to, especially in today's day and age. I mean, there's so much there between being a single mom, raising your kids,
Yeah.
going through the private equity, working as a physician, and then thinking like, okay, there's things are so many good things are happening, but it's not,
Yeah. Yeah.
always what it seems.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. My last
so
little bit is I'll just say the other
yeah,
thing, I got pretty heavily involved in like the healthcare reform side of things now too.
okay,
So, I mean, and that would be like, I'm part of what's called the Coalition for Patient-Centered Care. So
mm,
definitely want to like, anybody who listens who's, a physician or, a patient or whatever that wants to get involved in trying to like kind of change these things, not only private equity, but I mean, obviously there's a lot of issues in healthcare right now. So that's how I kind of channeled some of my negative energy, if you will, into trying also to do something more positive, and a lot through like the networking I did on LinkedIn. I really got, more involved in the reform side of it and trying to do what I can there. So I think, I mean,
yeah,
there's several organizations, and hopefully as people, kind of more and more people get involved, more and more people, get organized, and even some of the organizations come together, we all have a common goal, like really want to, kind of
sure.
restore physician independence. So that's been also like another kind of like, it's become kind of a passion of mine too. And really something that I think is so important.
Are those organizations on your LinkedIn or your website as well?
So the only one I'm like is I mean, I mention it from time to time. I don't have it like necessarily linked there, but maybe I could do that. But if LinkedIn is where I do, most of that. Occasionally, I'll on my like
Okay.
personal Facebook, I'll put some things too about what I'm doing for the on the reform side of it, and just some things that are happening more local in my region. But yeah, for sure, following me on LinkedIn is probably the best place to like see anything that I'm doing or involved with for the reform efforts.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Towns, thank you
Yeah.
again for
Yeah. My
being
pleasure.
so candid. And
Yep.
I look forward
Thanks for
to,
having me.
yeah, thanks for being here. And remember, everybody, the time to have the map is before you enter the woods, especially when it comes to your own financial plan. And with that, we're going to be signing off.
Yep.
So, okay.